Welcome to Dove and Dragon Radio. I'm your host, M.L.Ruscsak. I'm here with special guest and author, AG Flitcher. Welcome.
AG Flitcher.
I have a speech impediment, so I am sorry about that.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I didn't mean to offend.
You're not. I don't get offended. I do explain sometimes when I say things.
All right, I'm good now. Sorry.
You're good. So you have 3 books out. Is the Boone and Jacque trilogy, if I'm seeing this correctly?
There's 4 books out.
Well, I'm only seeing 3 right now, but it's okay. So what got you into writing before we get into the storyline?
Okay. When I first started writing before this series, I did a duology called Unforgiven. And it all started because my mom passed away and I was looking for an outlet to go through the grieving process. So that's really what sparked the journey. And then I tried to be a screenwriter and it was too competitive for me. So I just went ahead and gave myself a career change, which was personal trainer. And that didn't work either because I wasn't driven enough to really sell myself as a personal trainer. So I let that go, tried to write a children's book with a friend, and that didn't work. And I felt like I needed to be more educated. So I completed my bachelor's in creative writing. And then that's how Boone and Jacque started.
Awesome. So we got into it, but what is Boone and Jacque and what age demographic, and a little bit about your book?
Well, for age demographic, people ask me that a lot, and I didn't really focus on an age demographic. I focused on genre interest. So if people are into mystery, adventure, thriller, fantasy, those types of genres, that's what I focused on for the target audience. And it started as somewhat of a YA series, but as the characters got older and progressed in their lives, it became less YA and more for adults that are into fantasy with adult themes. That I would say maybe 15, 16 at the youngest should be reading this stuff. I mean, the first book's okay for a little younger. Actually, the youngest reader I had for book 1 was 11 years old. So I don't really focus on age. I focus on interest.
Well, it's a very good way to get into the book. But what is some of the adventures that Boone and Jacque go on?
Well, here in book 1, they discover magical history in their town called Saddleton, which is a very urban town where not much happens. And then once they start poking around at, hidden secrets that have to do with more than the normal, they get closer to chaos, and that chaos comes to surface, and magical beings and kings come through the ground, literally, and then encompass the whole atmosphere of the town. And then because of that, the adults that are aware and unaware of that side of the town's history become infatuated with having more and more power and control and being part of like elite groups that have control over the town without anyone knowing. So when these young people start to get closer to the truth of how the town became what it is now, they get themselves cornered into the chaos that's been spun by all these adults. And then as the series progresses, they either are brought out of town or they move to another town. And then we start to see their progress as human beings, but at the same time, we also see how lost they are in who they see themselves as, meaning they don't have parents or peers to guide them in the right direction. So they have to really rely on each other and learn from each other. And of course, whatever I put them through as a writer.
Well, one, as a writer, is always good to put our characters through a nightmarish situation for them to come out on top of, regardless of what that nightmare may look like, because your nightmare may look different from mine. At the same time, how much of this is putting yourself in your writing?
As in how it connects to me.
Mhm.
Well, I would say that I'm going to actually point the characters in the cover here. All right, so that's Boone, who is the more typical urban, you know, urban kid. If you ever read any Stephen King novels, you'd say that's pretty accurate. And Jacque right here, who's more book smart and logical and philosophical, whereas Boone is more hands-on and goes with his gut instinct.
Mhm.
So when I was writing those characters, I realized that they're different sides of me, like both sides of the coin of who I am, where the Boone side is my, I guess, anxious and I guess grounded version of me, where I don't really, there's a part of me that doesn't really focus on being book smart or uh, relying on fiction to understand who I am. So I'm very organic at heart. Where
Mhm.
Jacques is my literary side, where I do a lot of reading. I try to educate myself that way as well and learn about life in that respect. And of course, there are secondary characters that have different emotions that I have explored and observed how others explore their own emotions and their journey through life, whether it's something where they'd rather stay the way they are or try to change.
Well, that's interesting because you put a lot of things in your books. You have your characters are growing as people, and in the real life, we have to grow as individuals. But sometimes we need art to understand how to grow.
Yeah, and that's ultimately how these two characters support each other, is to see art and life as this balance that teaches us, both the black and white of life and the gray areas, where Boone uses, as he becomes an adult, art, as in paint, to creatively understand his emotions and his repressed emotions due to trauma that I won't spoil for the listeners here,
Mhm.
because that's what you'll see here by book 4, which I have right here, which is available on Amazon. All right. In book 4, which came out probably midsummer, uh, what was really important to me with this book is that they see how they became as adults, but more importantly, how lost they are due to years of repressed emotion and trying to ignore what happened to them in the past, or even people in their past that were, I guess, the foundation of what made them now. So, yeah.
It's very interesting because we have a lot of adults today are very lost. And you're pointing something out that they're lost because of the people they hang around with, the parents they grew up with, or the education they had growing up. They're just lost. They may have the 80,000 year job, but at the same time, they're not fulfilled because they don't have the mindset and they don't understand that they are lost.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, and I'm glad you connected that, because in the last book I'm working on for this series, book 5, which is called Sahon, I talked to this trauma specialist to understand what happens to someone when they repress their trauma, and she said that when you don't disperse the energy that is stored in you when a trauma happens,
Mhm.
it becomes this festering energy that creates self traps because you didn't take the time to disperse the energy through the people that you are interconnected with. And I never realized that until I started talking to people about the loss of my mother, the romance scam I was involved in, and all these things that truly affected me on a deeper level than I ever thought possible. And once I was able to be raw and honest with people, I was far more comfortable with myself and less anxious about, any decision I make. So I wanted that for my characters for the final book, where yes, I put them through similar scenarios of chaos or more intense than usual because it's more psychological and philosophical, but it still teaches them new things to kind of end cap their character arc that will allow them to be settled in their adulthood.
Right. And a lot of adults don't understand that you can't carry that emotional baggage with you. You have to let it go. You're doing this in a form of artwork with your books, your characters. You're teaching people how to do this, and it's very important. You did it from a work of fiction, but at the same time, you're teaching people it's okay to let the past go. You have to let it go.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the word that always comes back to me once I've worked through my issues is let the past be a memory, not stored energy that is toxic to you that you're too afraid to release due to the darkness of it and the severity of that trauma.
Exactly. It doesn't matter what the trauma is. And a lot of people, adults today, have trauma. If you grew up through the 70s through the 90s, you have trauma somewhere in there. Somehow you have some kind of trauma that's holding you back. Once you figure out what it is holding you back, you can work through it and move forward.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, in book 3, this one, all right, that was a pivotal moment for the characters because in that timeline they are 15 years old, and although that's a very young age to learn anything substantial about yourself, because of how far they are from feeling safe in the town that started everything in terms of their journey, they still have that intimacy and chemistry that allows them to grow not just with each other but separately as well, because that's what happens in book 3 is a few things happen that obligates them to be separated, but that gives them the opportunity to grow as a person before they're reunited. And I want to make it well-rounded for the end of this series by doing something similar where two characters have been segregated from each other and from their loved ones in order for them to go down this path to finalize whatever unresolved issues they have. And then when they're reunited once more, the whole journey as a person and as a character will be fulfilled enough that if I were to ever reintroduce them in another book, I don't have to explore anything else, and they're however old they are.
Now, are you thinking about doing more books after this series as a separate series?
Oh yeah, of course. I'm actually, I already did a couple information interviews with criminology professors in South Africa and I think Michigan State, where I'm trying to understand the mindset of a serial killer, which is the first standalone novel I'm doing once the series is over. A serial killer origin story, which I have officially named Black Rose Cocoon. The idea is that this female serial killer has a pattern where she kills people she either knows or has some kind of infatuation or loving connection to them. It's it's kind of my way of saying the opposite of what I did to Boone and Jacque, where they had their trauma that was stored in them when they were young and then let it go over time. Where in this serial killer origin story, it's going to be more focused on what happens to someone that has suffered severe trauma and has an uncontrollable impulse that just gets them further and further down into a mental state that makes them unrecognizable to the people who know them. So, yeah, but I have a lot more than that after that book is done.
Well, that's a good thing. Well, you're taking something, a topic, female serial killer. Those are very rare in today's society, which is good.
Mhm.
I mean, even through history, a female serial killer is very rare. Then you're going into the origin of what made them that way. It's
Yeah.
not just you're hunting a female serial killer. It's what made them tick. I don't think any comparable books that are out there.
No, I mean I've seen a couple books that have a dark female lead, but there's never been any reasoning behind someone being murderous. And that's one of the things I learned when I was doing these interviews, where they say a male killer usually kills at random. Like there's no emotion or reasoning behind that kill. It's just an impulse they have that they can't control. Where female killers are what one teacher told me, opportunist, meaning there's some kind of justification or reasoning as to why they kill a certain type of person. For example, Eileen Warnos. I don't know if you know who that is. She was a female serial killer that only killed middle-aged white men, which related back to her father issues. So that's what the whole basis is of my story, is that I want to show people that even though this is a monster, there is still a human side to them that has caused this new persona over time as they become an adult that has become who they are. So basically a negative character arc.
Very interesting concept. I mean, we know, but from watching like things like IGT or IDTV and things like this, there's always stories of the why. Usually it's, if you're talking about a male killer, like you said, it's usually at random. Actually, but you go into the female killers, there's usually a why. Females are usually very analytical when they're choosing a mark.
Yeah.
So taking that and making a story and bringing the human back to the monster.
Yeah.
That is something we have to remember. They're still a human being. We have to figure out what the issue is.
Exactly. And that's why I've been, kind of multitasking while I'm writing the final book of Boone and Jacque, because I know that because this is a standalone novel, I have to be very careful with how I craft this beforehand, meaning before I put pen to paper, because I have one shot to not only make this character and story memorable, but I have to create some kind of realism to it, even if the atmosphere and world I create around this person seems a bit more unworldly. Like, for example, the city that she lives in, city, is called Halberton City, which is an amalgamation of New York, Cairo, Egypt, and a little bit of England. And in this Gotham kind of, grungy city, there's things that don't really exist in our world. For example, there's something called blueberry tobacco. Blueberry tobacco is a type of tobacco with a certain chemical inside that when you inhale the tobacco, it has your sweet tooth the thing that you like the most food wise, the taste of it. So I wanted something, unique to the city, because everyone knows that what a cigarette is.
Mhm.
And I wanted to put a little spin on it that's not too far-fetched, but interesting enough for people to be like, that's kind of weird, but it gets your attention.
You created a surreal environment, which is great, and it works out great for film. We see this in the Marvel things. We see this
Yeah.
in other things every day. You have to have a surreal feel, but still keep the real world nuances.
Yeah, of course. I mean, what I'm doing with this whole city is I'm making it so big and so dense that whatever timeline I pick for other stories that revolve around a very busy city, that this atmosphere I create can be diverse and allow different tones for other books. For example, in another book I'm working on for this town, this city, it's what was it called? Well, actually, I don't have a title yet, but I'm doing a brother sister adventure story, and essentially it's kind of my adaptation or inspiration from The Talisman by Stephen King. I don't know if you know that book, but it was a real favorite of mine when I read it, and I just wanted to, do something in that genre.
Awesome. I mean, I'm a big Stephen King movie and book buff, but at the same time, I haven't read or seen everything he's done. I know enough to know my limits are with the horror genre. But using a book or a mentor through books, that is great. Now you have a way that you want to structure, and you're very analytic how you structure, which is great. At the same time, you're creating something completely different.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about me is I get bored easily, and I don't want to bore my audience. That's why this whole Boone and Jacque series has been a great practice run for standalone novels that I will do in the future, because I try to tackle as many genres and tones and different interpretations of how people, act and react and all this stuff. It allows me to show you, the audience, that life is very interesting, and it may seem dull at times and dark at times, but there's always some kind of chaotic imbalance that keeps us on our toes in a good way.
Very true. We need that imbalance. We need the dark to go with the light. You can't have light all the time. You can't have darkness all the time. You have to have the two to work together.
Exactly. When I was first writing this series, I didn't really think of any of that. It was just the first book was just me trying to not be so paranoid about when I finished something, and not worry too much about the execution of whatever I write. But once I started seeing how the characters were taking shape as they got older, I saw the potential for this series to be more than what I made it to be in the beginning.
Very true. That's always a good thing, though.
Mm-hmm.
Now you might finish your book and go, oh, there's another story here, but by another character.
Yeah, I mean, I always try to be careful with endings, because I don't how can I put this? I try not to know the ending ahead of time. When I hear about authors being overly structured and trying to outline the entire story, I'm like, but then you're cementing yourself into one version of your story.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you want to have a basic idea of what you want your story to be and how it ends, fine. But if you know for sure how it's going to end, you might not like the ending, and then you have to start all over again, where you could just see the first draft as the blueprint for you to play with.
Right. But we are almost out of time. So where can our listeners and our viewers find you?
I have a few social medias, all with the same handle, AG Flitcher. You can contact me through Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube.
Awesome. Well, it's so great having you on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
And of course, my dogs are going to interrupt us the last 2 seconds of the show.
Wrap it up.
But it was so wonderful. And thank you for being on the show. And
Thank you for
for all
having me.
our listeners and our viewers, happy reading.